Today we're diving into one of the most complex and frankly disturbing stories of our time, the Epstein files. It's a whole tangled web of power, dark secrets, and questions that, for a lot of people, still just don't have answers.
At the very heart of all this, you have one man, Jeffrey Epstein. And he wasn't just rich, he was one of the most connected people on the entire planet, moving in circles that most of us can't even imagine.
His whole world was built on this really toxic combination: an incredible network of powerful friends, a ton of money with mysterious origins, and, really, above all else, extreme secrecy.
But that all came to a really sudden end. And his death in a federal jail cell, before he ever faced a trial, didn't actually close the book on his story. If anything, it blew the whole thing wide open, creating this massive mystery that has captivated and horrified people ever since.
So that brings us right to the main question we're tackling today. When you hear people talking about the Epstein files, what are they actually talking about? What's really in them?
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with who Epstein even was, then look at that first really controversial plea deal. We'll explore his powerful inner circle, cover his final arrest and death, define what the files actually are, and then wrap up with why this story is still so important today.
First things first, who was Jeffrey Epstein, really? His journey from a college dropout and math teacher to this supposed financial genius, it's one of the biggest puzzles in this whole saga.
And the contrast is just wild. You had the public image he tried to sell, this elite financier, a big-time philanthropist, a friend to all the powerful people. But the reality? Well, it was a lot murkier. He didn't have a college degree, and the source of his massive fortune was always a closely guarded secret. He claimed he only managed money for billionaires, but nobody could ever really pin down how he made all that cash himself. His entire operation was just built on secrecy.
And that secrecy became a huge deal during his first major run-in with the law. This wasn't just some court case. It became a flashpoint for major questions about who gets justice in America.
So let's just walk through this. It starts back in 2005. Police in Florida open an investigation based on allegations from multiple underage girls. But then in 2008, this secret, super controversial deal gets made. It lets him completely avoid serious federal charges. And the result? He serves just 13 months, and for most of that time, he was even allowed to leave the jail every day for work release.
The reaction to that deal was, well, it was explosive. It was seen as just shockingly lenient, and to this day, it's used as a textbook example of the justice system failing victims. It's now considered one of the most heavily criticized legal deals in modern American history.
A deal like that just made people ask even more questions about his influence. So let's talk about that powerful inner circle and just how huge his network really was.
Instead of just a long list of names, look at the categories here. His connections weren't just in one area. They spanned the entire globe and cut across every single major sector of power you can think of: finance, politics, royalty, science, Hollywood, you name it.
Okay, and this is a really, really important point we have to make super clear. Just because someone's name shows up in his flight logs or they're on a photo or in his address book, that does not mean they did anything wrong. A lot of these people were just contacts or acquaintances, not co-conspirators. But it's the sheer breadth of these connections that fueled so much of the speculation.
And all that speculation really hit a fever pitch in 2019. This is what led to the final chapter of his life, an end that came without the public trial that so many people had been waiting for.
So here's what went down. In July 2019, Epstein gets arrested again, this time on federal sex trafficking charges. The whole world was getting ready for what was probably going to be one of the biggest trials of the century. But then, just about a month later, it was all over. He was found dead in his cell. The official cause of death was ruled a suicide.
But that official ruling? It really didn't do much to calm down public suspicion. And why? Well, you had reports of major security failures at the jail. We're talking guards falling asleep, cameras that weren't working, and even surveillance footage that just went missing. All of this stuff fueled this intense public skepticism and a whole firestorm of conspiracy theories that are still around today.
Which brings us right back to our main topic. After he died, the focus really shifted to getting all the secrets he left behind out into the open. So again, what exactly are the Epstein files?
All right, first things first. It's not some single secret binder hidden somewhere. The Epstein files is really just a catch-all name for thousands and thousands of pages of court documents. They're being released because of lawsuits filed by victims
And they contain all kinds of stuff. Sworn depositions, where people are answering questions under oath, private flight logs showing who was on his jets, and witness testimony that altogether paints a really damning picture of his entire operation.
And the way these things see the light of day is through a whole legal process. It starts when victims and media organizations file lawsuits. A judge then has to order the documents to be released. And once that happens, the records, many of which were sealed tight for years, finally get unsealed, and all the names and details inside become part of the public record.
So with all this information finally, slowly trickling out, why does this story still hit such a nerve? Well, because it really gets at these huge, fundamental questions about our society.
One of the biggest moments in this whole search for accountability was the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell back in 2021. She was Epstein's longtime partner, and with him gone, her trial was a huge deal. A jury found her guilty of helping him recruit and abuse young victims. This was so important because it didn't just put her behind bars, it legally validated the core claims that the survivors had been making for years, proving this was a whole network, not just the crimes of one man.
But really, this whole case forces us to ask some bigger, much more uncomfortable questions. Like, do the wealthy and powerful just play by a totally different set of rules? How do our own institutions fail so badly when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable people? And what's the real cost to society when secrecy and influence are just allowed to run wild?
When you really step back and look at it, the Epstein saga became so much more than just a criminal case. It fundamentally changed the way the entire world talks about power, who gets held accountable, and what justice even means.
And so, even as more documents come out and new details surface, the central question for so many people is still the same one, just hanging over everything we've learned so far. Is the full story still hidden?